Hello, Ben here from Supercoach Insider, bringing you my team reveal. It's the Saturday, footy's back in about 5 days or so, and it's getting a little bit hairy. So I don't know if you're like me, trying to kind of tinker with my side, figure out the structure I'm looking at, the pros and the cons as far as, the structure, guns and rookies, mid-price madness, the rest of it. Before I move on, please do like and subscribe and continue all of that awesome hard work for those that support us. Today, I'm just going to go through my team as of current, and let me know what you think when you get to the end as well, and whether you are looking at something that is very similar as far as structure. So now for me, my team has changed slightly as far as my premiums have changed a little bit. I've tried to change my structure a little bit as well to maximize what I believe to be points on field, and also trying to minimize that risk of some of those rookies on the bench as well. And I'll get into some of those explanations throughout this as well. So, the first one is I've actually gone from, and I had Dawson, I've had Stewart in most of my preseason sides, and I've kind of changed in the fact that I've gone with Doherty, who's come in a little bit more lately, simply because they have a really nice fixture early on. Hawthorn tagging day costs and tagging in their intra-club games and their preseason games is very much a concern for me. And Hawthorn do play Adelaide and Geelong fairly early. Geelong, I don't think have anyone else that they, no real midfielders to tag, so I think they'll go and tag a defender, possibly, and also with Dawson as well is also a risk at round 6. So that's probably looking around the upgrade season, and Doherty has a nice soft run, so I'm looking to go for him there. The other one I'm looking at is pretty much going with Ridley. Now, Ridley to me is very similar to a like Sicily type, like a Stewart type, as in intercept, mark, really good user by foot. And Essendon have really switched their structure to allow Ridley to be that intercept guy, to get some kickouts and to really kind of be more of that quarterback style. And that's because those other halfbacks are pushing up. So for me, he just poses value. I've also flirted with the idea of, well, if I had $100,000, then I'd probably just look at bringing in Dawson, because I think he'll still do really well. But I just like the flexibility that it has, and I do think he's going to be around that top 6, which is why he's in my side as well. Now, the other parts of it haven't changed too much, so I'm still looking at Yo, just because I think he provides too much value up in that slot, so nothing much has changed too there. I'm not too concerned. I was chatting to Damo from Jocks last night, and pretty much we're talking about, well, I think it was more just to get through the game, and it wasn't look like he was trying to get to those stoppages as much, whereas I think it was just more of a building sort of factor as far as getting into the preseason, get that done and get into round 1. So this is the easy part. You've gone Jinby here. I think Constable's probably the best option as far as being on field. Now, this is one that's a bit contentious for me. I am still looking at Wilmot, and I'm just not sure. I want to see the ins first as to whether I'm going there. Same as I think it's Kincotta. So seeing what sort of setup they go with, and the teams that are named in defence are probably going to really dictate whether I have a, say, Chesser, and whether I put Chesser in my midfield or whether I put him in defence. And I do expect him to be named. He's not really a sub-risk for me, but it's more of they might manage him, so he might miss some games here and there. But I still think that Chesser's scoring output is definitely worth having him in that side. And at the moment, I've got Kincotta just because of the price difference. He's more mature. They brought him in, so I think he probably gets the gig over Cowan, and they can work on their structure and get him some other games, possibly in the VFL, for him there. So I'm going to go to Rucks, because this is probably one of the areas a lot of people are having issues with. And I've gone English. I like Witts. He's fit. He's, doing well. It's just a case of that bit of cash, I guess, to free up. I still think with the amount of tours that the Dogs are playing, English is 25. He's hitting that peak kind of part of his career. He showed a high ceiling last year. And because of that injury risk that he does have, I'd rather start him than go somewhere else and then be forced to kind of go to English. So I think Witts will kind of come in and out and fade a little bit. English with his high ceiling. And I think he's someone that could go 115, which is why I'm just going to try and start him. I have flirted with Max Gawn. Anyone that saw the Ruck podcast would definitely know that. So the easiest part is obviously Marshall for me, and then going into, I should just go percentage owned, going into Madden. Now, I have really tried to flirt with the idea of having Radaglia at R3 and then using Sin as a loop. So if I have, say, some expensive rookies on my field in my midfield and forward line, so for instance, say I had Will Phillips in my midfield on the bench, and say I had Pedlar or McLean on my bench in my forward line, then that would allow me to loophole Phillips into Mackenzie and McLean into Sheasel, and I could take, if whoever plays early, if they go absolutely huge, then I'm not kind of leaving points on the bench. I really like that strategy, but then I also don't like spending that much money on a bench rookie in my ruck line, and it kind of throws my structure out a little bit. So I'm keeping an eye on it depending on how teams are named, but I'm not overly sold on Radaglia, which I think is what it kind of comes down to. Sometimes if you're going set and forget rucks, then why are you trying to come up with possible coverage? Because by round 8, he's probably out of your team anyway. So what's he covering you for? And I'm not going to be limping my way into using a loophole cover ruck early in the season. If one of those guys gets injured, then see you later, you're gone. And that's as simple as it is for me. So, all right, now midfield. This is where the bulk of the points are, and I can't seem to go past Clary and Laird. Now, I know some people have reservations about Clary. Oh, he played a little bit of defensive line. Yes, he was down a little bit in CBAs. They might also be trying to practice on that, in case he does get tagged, what can they do? Let's push him back there, maybe try and free things up a bit. But he's their best clearance winner, and I kind of see everyone else bending around him because getting Clary out of CBAs isn't going to be good for Melbourne. Plain and simple is in my opinion. So I think Clary still goes 120 plus. I still think they have, he's such a great VC. And then even, I'll just flick down here. So the draw as well, and the reason why, from round 4, West Coast, Essendon, Richmond, North, Gold Coast, Hawthorn, a lot of low teams in there, and Clary's the type to just towel up. And again, Chris keeps talking about you want to make sure you can afford people when it's the time to upgrade. Well, those rounds from round 4 to round 9, if he goes big in one or two of those, and I mean big, like Clary big, you're not going to afford him. And for me, that's where Max Gawn also kind of comes into the picture. Whereas if Max Gawn gets DPP, as soon as that round 6 hits or whatever it is, after round 6, if Max Gawn is DPP with their soft run, I'm jumping on as quick as I can. And that's where I sit with Melbourne, and that's where I sit with Clary and Max Gawn. Now, love to start Max Gawn, except for the fact that, I do think he's going to drop in price, and I think there's better price points out there for you. So in the midfield, I've gone Laird and Clary as my main 2 VC and Cs. Bonson-Pili playing more midfield. He's come out and spoken about it, saying he will get more midfield time. The Dogs are also very tall in their forward line, so they don't need Bont as a key forward leading marking type. He'll probably push in a bit more. He might rest a little bit forward, but all that means is he then gets probably a worse defender, and I still think Bont's going 120. And that's why he's in there for me. And then from there, and I've also toyed with just going 3 mids. I've toyed with maybe not having Bonson-Pili. I just don't like how it looks when you don't have Bont in the side. Same thing goes with Green, because anyone that goes 50 touches in an intra club, I don't know, it was against a B team or whatever, and he's also looked extremely good in some of the preseason stuff. All the talk's been about him. I still think he will be around my M8 mark, M8 to M10, in general range. So for me to start him at that value, I'm quite happy to kind of pay up for other defenders, pay up for other forwards or ruck forwards if they eventuate, and then try and go, that's my cheaper option to be in that sort of floating sort of range for me. So that's where it sits. Hopper, I've also kind of toyed with, can I leave him out? But again, 46% owned. I'm not going to be that person. And I've had a few people talk to me about, I'll go Setterfield instead of this person, or picking a point of difference just for the sake of having a pod. I was like, okay, well, if you want a point of difference, go Lockie Neal, go Touk Miller, people who are still a premium, who will still be in that top 8 sort of bracket, but maybe just aren't owned as much. Whereas if you go a 2%, a 3% person, like Parrish, who's good, but if Parrish has another calf issue or is injured, you are the only one hurting. And especially when it's high owned, like say Hopper or someone else that's really high owned, then you're going to be just one or two bad weeks. All of a sudden you're like, I'm the only one that gets hurt. And then you're now 30,000th ranked because the 30,000 other people just went past you. And now you're trying to chase your tail and catch up 100, 200, 300 points on everyone else. And that just gets really difficult. So sometimes it is better to just play safety with numbers. unless you just don't really rate their output as far as maybe being a rookie rather than like a mid-price or a premium. So that's where I'm kind of at with that side of things. Then I've been big on Callahan for quite a while. Again, they have a very soft draw to start, in my opinion. Someone put out a tweet saying, oh, really hard draw. I'm like, how? They play bunnies. Like, they literally play a lot of the weak sides. I don't care if they have to travel a lot because they're not the most defensively minded sides. And when you're an attacking winger who's tall, can mark, and are silky, you should get a lot of inside 50s, a lot of score assists, and hit the scoreboard yourself. So for his price point, I do think he probably will definitely make me enough money. I kind of see him around that 75, 80 sort of average mark. And I'm just hoping that he has one or two of those good games like silky players do. And I think when he does put it all together, his efficiency and impact, kind of like a Bontempelli type, will give him a really nice Supercoach score, and that will just price him up for me to be able to get rid of him. Alrighty, so the last two are Ashcroft. Obviously, if you're not doing Ashcroft, you don't know how to play. And that's not Brisbane bias, that's literally just standards. Mackenzie, I am a little concerned with Mackenzie, but he looks so good, and he had time and space and composure in like the CBAs in traffic. And I think Hawks almost kind of need someone like that who's not going to be flustered, who's not going to be rushed, because they are quite young in there. Now, if you have someone who actually is composed and has a bit of time, then he can try and link up and help everyone around him. And he's someone I think will actually get better as things progress as well. But at the same time, I have obviously got Phillips. Now, I'm not normally one to spend money on my bench. I think this year's a little bit different, though, because you don't want to have these cheap rookies on your bench if you feel like they're going to get cut or they're going to be a sub. Now, if anything, some of these younger guys are probably more likely to be rested rather than subbed, and I think that they are still going to have a pivotal part to kind of go through. Now, it's always a risk, but the more of these cheap rookies you have, and I don't know if it's a false sense of security, whereas for me, I'm like, hey, like I'm quite happy to spend up a little bit more on my bench this year just because I feel like they're in the system or the role's there for them and they are more likely to keep their spot. Now with, Chin Cotter, that's kind of like, well, you're just cheap enough with a good enough role that I hope you maintain it, and I think a lot of people will be in the same sort of a boat. Then I've gone Oscar Baker, I think is a really good option. Pretty much played his way into the best 22, I think, and it kind of makes it interesting for McLean for me because Baker, I think, was meant to be on the bench, wasn't really going to play much, I believe, until Dogs had like injury. And then Baker just went out there and absolutely towed up. Went like 100-something Supercoach, dominated, looked really impressive, and now it's like, okay, well, how do you keep him out? And McLean had like 15 touches, didn't really touch it in quarter one, was less than appealing. But I also think a lot of people are being really reactionary to McLean. And for me, I think McLean comes down to the preseason as far as when teams are named. So if he's named on field and it looks like he's got a pretty good role, then I'm not too bad. He's playing more like forward flank and on the wing, which I'm okay with. No real CBAs. And I still think McLean's a classy enough player that you could take a risk because he is still heavily owned. And it's one that if you just go and you overthink it and like, oh, I'm not picking him. Well, yeah, it's great if it works out. But then if he plays and does well, which we know he can have a really good score every now and then all of the casual players will be like, yeehaw, and cashing in, while you're then like, oh, I actually overthought it. You know, a really good player who, McLean is. And then you're kind of going, oh, I'll go Sheasel, who's never played a game before, just because he looked like he had played a couple good games. But first-year players generally aren't that consistent, where McLean is probably going to be consistent, whether that's consistently mediocre. No, I'm kidding. But I think it's probably better to back him in rather than try and go like a Philippou, who is definitely the opposite. Last one here is Davey. Now, I've kind of looked at, if I have Wilmot in my team, then I'd put like Chesser into my midfield, obviously depending on if they're named, etc. And that's where it would sort of free up. Davey might then push back into the forward line, and there's a little bit of flexibility there. And I've spoken previously. Now, one thing I am trying to do with my team is I'm trying to be fairly flexible. Now, previously when I've gone like guns and rookies, and I've still done well in that sense, I think the tide has changed a little bit with the trade boost and the extra trades and the mid prices and the value we have this year. I don't think guns and rookies is winning because you need to kind of try and flip and turn. If your rookie gets subbed, then all of a sudden that cash generation stalled, so you can't then go and upgrade another rookie. And if you start with a lot of rookies, then how many are going to pop up throughout the season to be able to downgrade to that it will still be good enough to sort of try and make more money or play anyway? So I think this year is definitely the year for value, and I'm trying to kind of balance between my premiums and my mid prices and some more expensive rookies. And I think that's probably the play to go. Now, if I went guns and rookies, I feel like I'm less flexible because I'm kind of backing myself into trusting my instincts on the premiums that I'm going for. And I've seen, just for me personally, times before, like last year I had Whitfield who was underperforming and I traded him out way too late. Some people are a bit more like, oh, premium, oh, he sucks, cut, dry, move. Whereas I was like, well, hang on, no, he's my premium, I'll back him in. A few years ago, I traded Josh Kelly, obviously, and then he was playing forward. I was like, oh, his role's horrible, I can't keep him anymore. And then I trade him. Next minute, they put him back in the midfield, starts averaging like 110, and I'm like, why? So I feel like with this a little bit more mid-price or, like let's say Ridley, I'm like, if he's not doing it for me, then I'm not really attached to him because I thought he would be that sort of, D6, and then I could just trade him knowing that he was sort of, I hoped he would do this and I thought he would do that, but then I could still move him. Or like Hopper or Callahan or, like Green even, trying to kind of go, okay, well, I'm looking for value. And then particularly in that forward line with, which you will see, a couple of mid-price options where it allows me to shift and pivot a little bit more quickly because I'm not going to be as attached to them. And that's where I sort of sit with my structure and my idea for this year. All right, so forward line, which is really interesting because I've had 4 forwards quite a lot, but it's also been at the sacrifice of, say, Bontempelli. Because I've had like, Laird, Oliver, Green, and I could easily do that with Phillips as my sort of, M8. But then I'm like, well, do I want a Cornelio instead of a Bontempelli? Do I want a, Goulden instead of a Cornelio or Goulden instead of Bontempelli? So I know there's differences as far as, price because you're talking about, what's that about, 90,000. But that 90,000 is pretty much a difference from me going from Madden to Radaglia. So I'm like, well, do I want Radaglia on my bench, sucking up my juice and, taking my money? Or do I want Bontempelli on field against a Cornelio or Bontempelli on field against a Goulden? So that's where I've kind of gone, okay, well, maybe I'm just going to go a little bit more mid-price in that forward line and allow me to kind of shift and change a little bit to see who's coming in round 6 DPP, Boak, Gawn, etc. Try and keep myself a little bit more flexible there. And I'll explain my rationale for Goulden. So I do like Goulden. He could definitely be top 6. My concern is that they also have the first buy. So if he's top 6, then cool. I'll just expect that I might have to pay 520, 550,000 for him. He's probably averaging 100 if that's the case, which is probably around that 550 mark. If he has one down game, he'll drop back down to like 520. So I'm like, cool, I'll pay $40,000 more during the year. I am not that concerned. I'm probably looking to go there after the buy because first buy. So I think if he is top 6, then I'll just pay that money and I'll probably rather back in, some of my other forwards or back in, Bontempelli against him. So I don't think I'm going to really lose points. It's just more about going, okay, well, they have that buy first, so I'm going to try and look to do that as well. Comparing the midfield as well, my thoughts on, so Lockie Neal, they play, I think it's 6 home games out of the first 15. They do have a lot of easy games early in the season, so I am tempted for that fact. But they have the first bye, and then I think it's their game straight after their bye, which is the Gold Coast Geelong bye round, where you don't really need people missing anyway. I think Brisbane play Hawthorn. So now I'm like, okay, well, maybe I could just go, well, they play, 6 home games out of the first 15, so they have a lot of away games. And after that bye, when I don't really need someone anyway, he has Hawthorn. So he might actually get tagged and then drop cash for me to pick him up the round after. And then they play, I think it's 5 out of their last, so was it 6? So I think it's like, 5 out of the last 10 games at home or something, or 6 out of the last 9 or something or other. So they play a lot more games at home to finish the year. So I'm looking at sort of trying to upgrade to Lockie Neal then. Tuke Miller, similarly, they have a really hard draw to start with a lot of games away as well. And I think Tuke was averaging about 5 or 6 points less in away games, and then a lot less during losses as well. So that's why I'm kind of avoiding those two. Plus the injury concern with Tuke is pretty much why I'm sort of fading them as far as a starting option. Same reason I'm sort of fading Dawson and Stewart, not because I don't like them, but because mainly just those little intricacies of draw or being tagged or just little things that I think, if it's just one person, it might not be a huge deal, but they start to, stack up a little bit in the long run. And I'm just trying to look at times that I can sort of target them to become, part of my team. All right, so forward line. Obviously, you can't go really past Dunkley on this one. So Dunkley is straight in, hasn't moved. I have had Cornelio, but I was concerned they have the soft draw, which is why I wanted him. Had a little bit of a niggle, didn't play, I think it was the intra-club, and then played the trial game, and then copped a few sort of bangs in that. I think it was like a bit of a medial knock or something or other. So I'm like, he had a niggle before the game, rested for a week. Little niggle, which, who knows how serious or little that was because it's GWS. And then he came in and copped like another couple of big hits. And then I was like, okay. And then Goulden was sort of there for value. So then I was kind of favoring that as far as a strategy to kind of free up a little bit of cash for someone who still might average around the same. And in the end, I've kind of decided I'm just going to back in 3 people I think will be top 6 and average 100 plus. And I've gone Dunkley, Rosie, and Taranto. My theory is, anyway, you look at every single year, top 6 forwards are pretty much either forward mids or forward rucks. There's not too many genuine forwards in their own right that will actually be top 6. And that's why you'll see Petrarca will be forward mid and he was number 1. And then the next year he's a midfielder only. You see McRae and Bontempelli at some point were forward mids, average 108, and then they're midfield only. Last year with the DPP switch, we were blessed more than I think we will be in the future because, you had Bailey Smith, you had Liberatore, you had Bontempelli, you had Parker. Again, all these forward mid types became the top 6 to 10 forwards for the season. So that's why with Rosie being mainly more a midfielder now, I'm like, wonderful. Well, if he's playing more in the midfield, then that automatically ticks him up to be a better candidate for a top 6. Same as Taranto, he's now pure midfield, so that then, again, better candidate for top 6. Dunkley, pure midfielder, again, top 6. And that's where Goulden kind of comes into it. Now, Goulden was a 10% midfielder last year, right? Really impactful going forward, really classy player. Chris was pretty much raving about how, just couldn't believe how good he looked when he played the trial game, the preseason game. And again, I don't expect him to get 80% or whatever it was, 70, 80% CBAs because Mills is coming back into that team. But I do expect he'll get around that 50%. And Luke Parker came out saying, well, one of them will probably rest forward, which means that it'll probably be Goulden will rest forward, then he'll go in the midfield, Parker might rest forward, and then they kind of rotate around a little bit. And I still think that's going to be really, really beneficial for his scoring. But again, with that first buy, I'm just looking, if he's going to be that guy, I'll bring him in then. Hopefully, maybe he's just killing it so much that he might actually get a tag. And I don't know if he's really copped that before. So consistency has never really been there. I'm not going to back anyone that's going there because he is extremely heavily owned. He's now up to 34%. So, it's that recency bias on he just absolutely killed it. He's also got that feel about him where it could be Petrarca-esque as far as someone who just dominates that preseason and you go, okay, and then next minute just goes absolutely big and then you're scrambling to get him in. So that my concern is if he does go big, then I'm kind of behind those other people. But then again, I'm kind of backing in, say, another premium against him. And if it means a midfielder, I know they're different prices, but again, if I was going to bring Goulden in, then I'd probably be having Radaglia there, having Phillips on field, and then maybe trying to have a loophole swing player like McLean would then be my loop between my forwards and my mids. So in my mind, it's still Bontempelli against Goulden. I know the price is different, but just how it sort of matches up. So I'd rather just kind of back that in and then bring him in at the most opportune time. If he is doing well, I've got all the knowledge of, hey, how has he performed with the role? Has he been tagged or dealt with that tagged? Has he been consistent? Right, and then I'll pick him up at 520, 550K if I need to after the buy, and away we go. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, and I have a bit more knowledge before that fact, but I still feel like he's got that hurt factor. And who doesn't like a good-looking player, as in the way they play is attractive. So this is a little bit different for me. So now I'm looking at, and the more I sort of think about it, the more I just keep coming back to it, and it's more about keeping that flexibility. So I've got Nat 5. Now, the start of the year is so easy as far as a forward to potentially score. Now, if he's in my side, I'm looking at him to maybe have 1 or 2 big games and have a fairly high ceiling where he might actually, peak 1 or 2 good games. He's really good at contested mark. Let's hope he hits the scoreboard. He'll push up the ground pretty high. And what's selling me is he has no shoulder strapping. He looks good. People that were actually at the ground as well just said how well he was moving and he was really influential. So the reasoning is, they have St Kilda, but then they have North, West Coast, Adelaide, Gold Coast, Dogs and Brisbane a little bit harder, and then Hawks. So by that sort of round 8, after that sort of round 8 period is what I'm sort of looking at for him. And he's probably the first on my list, I think, that I might try and move on depending on... So once that round 6 sort of DPP hits, I might look to move him then, depending on him and someone else, like Yo's or these other mid-prices to see, who can I flip and try and be really aggressive with my trades, with my boost in that sort of, round 7, 8, 9, 10 to try and really go one up, one down, one up, one down, one up, one down, and just go premium, premium, premium. And then try and get a bit of a head start on the rest of the competition that way. And that's where the mid-prices kind of come in for me, depending on rookies coming in, but I'm trying to be really aggressive using them as my stepping stone to get more premiums than others at an earlier stage. So, Nat Fyfe is there. Now, Flanders is the other one for me, and it's pretty much, I know he didn't really get CBAs, which is kind of, in my mind, a good thing, because I think he had like 10%, right? So Took was out, and then I think you saw... Davies, who I thought was really impressive, getting more of that chunk in that sort of midfield. So for me, Flanders is good because I think he's still racked up a lot of the ball. And I think Gold Coast still really need him. He's almost having like that Rankin kind of role a little bit last year. And by that, I mean, he was actually like pushing up towards the contests. So he wasn't getting CBAs, but he was still kind of getting involved in stoppages and then sort of getting involved that way by pushing up the ground. Now, he's not going to kick goals all the time. I think his price point is good enough that I still think he's going to make enough cash for me. Now, if I need to pivot from there, then I'm happy to. And that's what his price point does buy me. That's what Fife's price point buys me as well. Like if Braun goes really well, then I can adjust that way and I can kind of shift and move using those two to make some corrections if I need to. And I'd rather kind of that than over-capitalising my forward line, I think, at the moment, because it also allows me to split those two. It means I don't need to really play another forward rookie as much in my side. Now, speaking of rookies in my side, I'm fading Philippou just because that deep forward, I think he's got great hands. I think he's going to be extremely good for them as a club. But we even saw last year with Rochelle, who went big. He got like 100 and kicked some really good goals. But then if you're relying on marks and goals, and if you start playing a bit deeper, because Saints are riddled with injuries, so I think his job security is fine, then I just think he's going to have these stale games as a young player that relies on like goals or marks close to goal in order to score. So Rochelle peaked out at I think it was about 260, 280. So I think, and that was with a one or two really big scores. So Philippou could get to 560. 560. Geez, yeah, cash that in. He's a keeper. He could get to 260 and maybe make you 100, but then I think he'll just stall out. Now, this is one I'm happy to kind of correct if I need to. If he's looking good, has some good scores in there, role looks a bit better after, not just a one-game sample, then I'll bring him in at that point. Now, that's sort of, I think I'm just fading him. And I've spoken to a few other people that are thinking the same sort of way. One that I am looking at that point is Sheasel. And on the contrary, I don't really like too many expensive price rookies, but even when he was in the forward line, I saw him push up the ground towards like the opposition's defensive 50 and was like laying tackles and stuff up there. I think he's got really good goal sense and a good enough work rate to sort of push back. Played like 80% time on ground, so I think that's really beneficial as well. Scored 70-odd with one goal, which I think is, again, a really strong sign. And then they were also willing to throw him in that back line as well as a bit of an extractor. So I think he is able to go into a few roles, whether that's mid-game, part of the game, good enough goal sense that I think he'll still get, 15 to 20 touches, maybe some games at some point, and still maybe kick a goal or two. So I'm kind of putting him around that maybe 70 average, which I think at that price point, I don't mind too much, just hoping to jag one or two good scores. Reminds me a bit like Rosie a few years back, where you kind of try and disregard cheap rookies, expensive rookies, but I think there's enough room in it for me where I might try and start him and then go backwards to McLean, or it'll be Sheasel to McLean, or this next guy possibly to McLean instead. And that's what I'm sort of toying up with at the moment, because what I am looking at is Pedler. Now, I know Pedler, I think he was picked 11 maybe. 10 to 12 it was. Hasn't really had a really good run with his body, but now he actually looks, fit. Preseason's been all the hype. They're saying, I hope that he can now transfer that, obviously, into the season. Scored, I think it was 50 odd from 55% time on ground, and they were flogging West Coast, so, well, what's the point? I think they just kind of racked half their team and just, rotated them around. So I think he provides something really valuable for them. I think he's definitely got the talent enough to, be able to score well enough and jag some scores. So he's one that I'm kind of looking at the moment. He's not one that's been heavily owned because I think people are just going elsewhere, the Kings or the rest of it. So this is one I'm looking at, toying up the difference between it. And I'm kind of leaning that way. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to go yet. It sort of depends on teams being named. Because that could easily become, like a McLean, or things can shift a little bit from there. And the last one I am definitely looking at is Green. So I was a little concerned. I think Mitch Lewis is coming back in a month's time. I'm trying to look at, well, then who do they leave? Because I think he's that third tall, so I don't think it's going to impact him too much with Lewis. It might even help him out a little bit. Like Kaziski's in that forward line. There's probably a little bit more smalls in that mix. So I think I'm being sold that he's the Gunston sort of replacement. So look, he's cheap enough that I could probably sort of run with him anyway. Kicked a few goals against Collingwood, who have some really good defenders. So I think that's probably a promising sign as well. But as a forward in a not so good side, it's a sketchy one for me. So they're the rotating parts. Davey could even come back into that sort of forward line. And I'm just sort of waiting for teams at the moment, but I don't mind my structure. So I've gone 2 premiums, or by premium, I mean as in I believe they'll be top 6 or around that top 6 to 8 or top 8 to 10 in the midfield, right? That range. So that's a premium. Otherwise, you're not starting them unless you think they're premium, because otherwise you're just buying yourself time. So I've got 2 premiums, a mid-pricer in the defense, and I guess, Jones is kind of a mid-price, an accelerated, more expensive rookie. Jinby, Constable, so I think that's a pretty good format for that back line. There's so many defenders. I think you just have to run the gauntlet and kind of go a little bit more thin there, or even just go straight up premiums and rookies and just get rid of Yo, get rid of Jones, and just go 3 and 3. I think is also possible, or have Jones as that sort of D3 still and just go 3 premiums that way. Midfield, I think I don't mind the 3 or 4 scenario. I don't like going much more than that because it kind of changes the balance of the rest of your side. So choose 3 or 4 premium mids I think that you like. There's plenty of mid prices out there. 3's good. If you like some more mid prices, then you can even go down a little bit as well. English, Marshall, pick your R1 to go with Marshall. I think I'm happy with English with Wits, any of those kind of combinations as far as what you're looking for there. Darcy Cameron, I could be swayed with Darcy Cameron in that ruck line. If he's named the ruck to start the match, then I might be swayed. Sell me in the next few days that they were trying to manage him through and let Cox do a bit more of the ruck work because he was coming back from injury. Sell me that pipe dream and I might consider it. And then, that forward line, just trying to work out whether I go four premiums and 2 rookies there. So I could easily go those 4 plus, disregard 5, disregard Flanders, and just go a McLean, a Shees, or a Pedler, and use those sort of 3 to kind of round out the team. That's what I'm looking at. Let me know what you think. Let me know if it's similar to you. Let me know if you like the structure and the team as I have at the moment. Thank you for your patience as well. I know a few of you were, where's Ben's team? Where's Swizz's team? I do apologize. I've been extremely busy. Took time off work, obviously paternity leave, and then everything's just kind of compounded. And then we get to a week before the season, and then we have other content that obviously you guys want as well. So this is me. This is my team. We'll talk to you next time. Like, subscribe. That's it. I'll catch you soon. Bye.